All right, you feel me?
Yeah.
Follow my lead.
Clark, what is this?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
I think there is no greater horror than the fear of the unknown or something our minds cannot fully comprehend. That is precisely what the recently released horror movie Backrooms deals with, and it has already attracted a lot of attention for its unique concept. However, the lore around the titular Backrooms goes further back in time. It started as a single unsettling image and a short creepypasta post, but it has exploded into a sprawling multiverse of overlapping canons, each answering the questions of who created it, what lives there, and why reality glitch drops people into the endless beige hell. Because the Backrooms are a collaborative folk horror project rather than a tightly controlled franchise, there is no single official canon. Instead, what we have are several major continuities, each with its own origin myth, entities, and metaphysics. In this video, I will walk you through the entire origin and history of the Backrooms and try to answer all the questions that you might have.
What did you find?
The place.
Birth of the Liminal Maze. The Backrooms were first defined by an anonymous post that paired a photo of an empty, yellow-tinted office-like space with a short description warning that if you glitch out of reality in the wrong areas, you may end up in the Backrooms. In this proto-canon, the Backrooms are not a designed facility, but an accidental out-of-bounds area of reality. I think the best way to describe this is an infinite warren of monotonous rooms, buzzing fluorescent lights, and damp carpet stretching for hundreds of millions of square miles, or even literal infinity. The horror is almost entirely environmental. I mean, just imagine the unsettling sense of being stuck in the world's largest, most mundane liminal space, with only a vague mention that God help you if you hear something wandering around nearby. Creator and purpose in the earliest lore. In that first incarnation, nobody knows who made the Backrooms, and that ignorance is the point. The space feels like a memory of offices and storage units scraped out of reality and copy-pasted into an extra-dimensional null zone. But neither the post nor early community discussions attribute it to gods, aliens, or anything else. Thematically, the Backrooms embody a fear that there are places behind the world's textures that were never meant for human presence, and that if you fall through the cracks, you discover a back end with no designer manual and no exit. I can only imagine how unnerving and eerie that must be like.
What are we doing? What do what?
Early entities. Hints, not a bestiary. As I said before, the original text mentions something wandering around, but there is really nothing specific about this. That minimalism kept the focus on existential dread rather than monster attacks, leaving any entities as a blurry threat just outside the fluorescent glow. Only later did the community formalize entities into numbered species, databases, and full-on zoology. And this, my friend, is where the plot thickens further. From single level to infinite level. As the concept spread, fans on Wikidot and fandom built full Backrooms wikis, codifying levels, survival guides, factions, and a catalog of entities. This extended lore usually treats the Backrooms as a vast extra-dimensional structure broken into levels. Some of these resemble the yellow office maze, others mimic malls, caves, cities, oceans, or uncanny natural landscapes. Different systems exist, but all assume that this space is contiguous, mutable, and semi-alive in a way that standard reality is not. Who created the Backrooms in Wiki lore? I really like how the mainline Backrooms wiki on fandom and the Wikidot branches generally do not enforce a single in-universe creator. Instead, they allow multiple coexisting canons and origin theories. Some stories suggest the Backrooms have always existed as a kind of extra-dimensional backstage that predates human civilization, only discovered when people accidentally move through unstable parts of reality. Others imply that powerful entities or cosmic forces shape the structure, but different articles contradict one another on whether any particular god, demon, or AI is responsible. I think that this deliberate ambiguity actually makes sense, because it is a part design choice and part necessity. You see, hundreds of contributors submit levels and entities, so a fixed singular origin would constrain creativity and invalidate fan work. To reconcile this, the canon list on the Backrooms wiki explicitly frames the setting as a multiverse of interpretations, with some canons granting a divine architect and others leaving the origin fundamentally unknowable. But one such theory that I find particularly interesting is that many wiki-based canons introduce human groups trying to survive and map the backrooms, such as the Meg, Major Exploration Group, and other factions. In most continuities, Meg did not create the backrooms, and it formed in the 2010s as a survivalist research collective documenting levels and entities after the space was already there. Some fan theories also claim that experimental organizations or secret projects weaken the boundary between reality and the backrooms, but the mainstream wiki presentations treat these groups more as archivists, colonists, and occasional villain than as original architects. What counts as an entity in this canon? On the Backrooms wiki, entity is a catch-all term for anything that lives in the backrooms, ranging from human wanderers to animal-like predators to incomprehensible eldritch beings. In universe, entities are defined as creatures that inhabit the levels, each with particular behavior, intelligence, and habitat. But out of universe, the wiki describes them as any living thing in the backrooms, with pages that can look like files, diaries, or narrative reports. The Meg entity list system gives each entity a number, a common name, and a habitat frequency to help wanderers assess risk. Standard entities are widely recognized species that show up in multiple levels and across many stories. Examples from the wiki include the humans trapped in the backroom, treated as entities because they have adapted to and now inhabit the space. There are also these dangerous fake windows that lure wanderers, often harboring hostile beings or unknown hazards on the other side. Smilers are the lurking creatures identified by their glowing eyes and unnaturally wide smiles in dark spaces, and they stalk wanderers and attack if approached or provoked. We also have death moths, which are moth-like creatures with highly variable threat levels, including some deadly variants attracted to light. Lastly, there are the clumps that are amorphous assemblies of limbs and flesh that drag victims into the walls or floor. I know this pushes the setting toward a quasi-scientific survival horror vibe, as if wanderers are cataloging wildlife in an alien biosphere, but it sure as hell makes it more thrilling. And this reminds me of the so-called entities that we see in Backroom. I would say the initial entities are among the Smilers, but there is a lot more going on in the movie, which I will come to later in the video. Why do these creatures exist? Most wiki canons imply that entities arose as a native fauna of the Backrooms, or as mutated offshoots of human and animal life, reshaped by the environment's unstable physics. Some levels are explicitly described as breeding grounds or refuges for particular species, suggesting an emergent ecology rather than a single designer placing them by hand. Other stories hint that entities are manifestations of human fear and subconscious imagery, making the Backrooms a kind of psychic terrarium where our anxieties acquire teeth and chase us down infinite hallways. Is there a god behind the walls? The Pantheon's cosmology. On some branches of the Backrooms wiki network, authors have built structured canons that give the setting a mythological backbone, including the Pantheon-related narratives and the Reverence continuity. In these cosmologies, the Backrooms are tied to powerful divine beings, such as the Children of the Empyrean Sea and their leader, the Exalted One, godlike entities born from primordial chaos beyond the known cosmos, whose actions ultimately cause the Backrooms to exist. This approach treats the Backrooms almost like a mythic underworld or man-made heaven gone wrong. In simple terms, I would say this is the side effect of divine conflict and construction rather than a random glitch. The Origins canon on one Backrooms wiki presents a more explicit creator myth, which is that the Backrooms are created by a single god, who then brings forth several pillars, semi-divine descendants, that help shape and govern the space. In this continuity, humanity is on the brink of collapse after catastrophic attacks in December 2024. The Backrooms become a stage where humans, entities, and divine forces collide in a new era of terror and fragile resistance. I think that the best part about this narrative is that here, the question who created the Backrooms actually has a straightforward in-universe answer. It is a god and their pillars, but even then, the text plays with unreliable narration and incomplete knowledge. From a meta standpoint, Origins demonstrates how flexible the Backrooms template is, and how it can be rewired into a quasi-religious apocalypse story without breaking the core aesthetic of liminal horror.
It's a real mess, but also beautiful.
From creepypasta to hard sci-fi, filmmaker Kane Pixels took the Backrooms concept and pushed it in a distinct direction, developing a series of analog horror YouTube shorts and eventually a feature film produced by A24. Pixels treats the Backrooms as an anomalous extra-dimensional space accessed through scientific experimentation, leaning heavily into a hard sci-fi framing rather than pure folk or theology. In interviews, he describes being influenced by games like Portal, Half-Life, and Minecraft that have constrained industrial spaces, enigmatic research facilities, and environmental storytelling. In Kane's continuity, a corporation or research institute called Async runs Project KV-31, an experiment involving this technology. This is essentially a kind of spatial or temporal manipulation that opens a portal to the Backrooms. But for me, the key detail is that Async does not create the Backrooms. They discover and breach a pre-existing extra-dimensional region whose rules they do not fully understand. The corporation simply functions as the catalyst that exposes humans to it rather than the architect. In this universe, the Backrooms feel like a hostile natural phenomenon. It is more like a pocket reality with peculiar physics, where space loops, time flows strangely, and structures flicker between states. Async behaves like classic sci-fi hubris by poking a hole into a hostile ecosystem because it seems useful, and then lose control.
Hello?
Entities in the Kane Pixels continuity. Pixels' series and related lore depict entities as native inhabitants of the Backrooms rather than lab creations, treating them as the only supernatural variable in an otherwise grounded world. The creatures range from formless horrors glimpsed in distant hallways to more defined shapes silhouetted against the yellow walls, often shot in a way that makes viewers question whether they saw anything at all. Community interpretations often align these beings with glitches, predators adapted to the topology of the Backrooms, or emergent phenomena produced when reality's geometry is stretched too far. The lack of explicit explanation fits the analog horror vibe, and instead of dossiers and bestiaries, viewers get distorted VHS footage, redacted memos, and sudden chases through looping corridors. However, the movie Backrooms doesn't shy away from the entities in the Backrooms, even though a definitive explanation is not given in the film as well. The movie opens with a researcher from Async Research Institute who gets attacked by an unknown entity, and later the protagonist Clark finds his way into the Backrooms. He then takes his assistant Kat and her boyfriend Bobby to explore this otherworldly dimension, where an unseen entity kills Bobby. However, the most disturbing entity in the film has to be that of Pirate Clark, which is a twisted version of Clark from the real world, combined with his insecurities and flaws. In the final scene, we even see a backroom version of Clark's therapist Mary, and even this is a monstrous variant that embodies her trauma. My take on the film's version of the Backroom and the entities is that the Async organization came upon the Backrooms purely by accident, and now they are mapping it and researching on it with some sinister, bigger plan in mind. Also, a visit to the Backrooms probably takes a permanent toll on an individual, and this nearly sentient realm creates poor copies of the real beings, turning them into the twisted version. Even the rooms can be altered by making it appear as a fragment of the memories of those who go there, and the process is a rather quick one, almost instantaneously. The Backrooms as a collective unconscious. Beyond specific canons, there is a strong fan theory current that treats the Backrooms as a manifestation of the human collective unconscious. It is a space born when humans built interior environments and started fearing the spaces between them. In this interpretation, the Backrooms exist because we saturate the world with liminal spaces, such as stairwells, corridors, empty offices, and our shared anxieties about them result in a psychic architecture that sometimes becomes physically accessible. Entities in this reading are not alien or lab monsters, but personifications of fear, loneliness, and the uncanny. The reason the Backrooms feel familiar yet wrong is that they are built from mental images of real spaces, but stripped of function, leaving only vibes and dread. Is it just a glitch in the simulation? Exploring the game metaphor. Another popular interpretation, especially in Reddit and fan discussions, is that the Backrooms are a broken chunk of a simulated reality, analogous to a corrupt level in a video game. Here, no clipping is literally a collision detection bug in the universe's physics engine, and the backrooms are beta test zones, memory garbage, or sandbox areas never meant for player characters. Users theorize that entities might be corrupted NPCs, debugging processes, or experimental organism templates that never made it into the release build of reality. This framing makes the backrooms feel like a nightmarish realm with an infinite test environment that has developed its own ecology and refuses to be deallocated. It also explains the repeated textures, nonsensical geometry, and sudden level transitions as aesthetic echoes of low-budget game maps and unfinished spaces. Cosmic horrors and always there theories. Many fans explicitly prefer a cosmic horror answer, and if I go by this logic, then the backrooms were not constructed at all. They are a primordial structure older than our universe, and we simply stumbled into them. In this view, the very question who created the backroom is a human instinct incorrectly applied to something that precedes concepts like design, purpose, or ownership. Entities, then, are just the things that have always lived there, and our arrival turns us into invasive species in their home, not the other way around. This lets stories lean into the unnerving idea that we are the intruders in someone else's domestic space, with an unending series of corridors that feel like office storage, because that is the closest metaphor our brains can grab onto for an unfathomable extra-dimensional morphology. Why are the backrooms like that? Exploring liminal space aesthetic and mundane horror. On a meta level, the backrooms look and feel the way they do because they weaponize the liminal space aesthetic. Transitional environments stripped of people and purpose. Fluorescent lights, yellowing wallpaper, stained carpet, and modular ceilings are drawn from cheap office parks and retail backrooms, spaces that are meant to be ignored but become uncanny when empty. The backrooms exaggerate this by making those in-between spaces infinite, forcing characters to exist permanently in a place that was designed to be passed through, not lived in. In-universe, different canons rationalize this in several ways. Some suggest that the backrooms copy design patterns from human architecture, like an extra-dimensional echo, learning from whatever seeps through reality's cracks. Others imply that human perception is auto-texturing an incomprehensible geometry with the nearest recognizable mental assets, such as generic offices, warehouses, parking garages. I think this appears the way it does because the true structure would break our minds. Environmental hostility and survival horror logic. The environment itself is often treated as the main antagonist, with features like buzzing lights, intermittent power, unstable floors, and shifting layouts that conspire to disorient and exhaust wanderer. Many levels are described as actively hostile, with physics anomalies, time distortions, and spatial loops making navigation and resource management an ongoing nightmare. This supports the survival horror framing, where the backrooms are a dungeon crawl built out of office parks, designed to grind characters down psychologically. In some canons, the hostility is intentional, the result of divine malice or cosmic indifference. In others, it is just how this extra-dimensional ecology works, with no moral intent behind its lethal geometry. Either way, the effect is the same. The backrooms are like that because the fiction wants a setting where everything like walls, lights, entities, and even space itself becomes part of the threat. I also appreciate the logical interpretation of this entire brand of other dimensional horror. Scholarly and pop culture analyses frame the backrooms as digital folklore that channels modern anxieties about office life, surveillance, consumerism, and climate-controlled non-places. The spaces resemble abandoned corporate environments, retail back areas, and endlessly repeated modular rooms, mirroring fears of being trapped in meaningless work or infrastructure with no exit strategy. The monsters are less scary than the idea that the building never ends, and nobody even remembers why it was built. I know that sounds pretty heavy-duty stuff, but I also think that it makes sense. So, in simple words, the backrooms are like that because late capitalist architecture is like that. Bland, interchangeable, strip-lit, and psychologically draining. The fiction simply takes those aesthetics and removes the comfort of exits, co-workers, and fire codes, leaving only the architecture and whatever else shares the corridors with you. So, in canon, do we ever really know? Across the major backrooms continuities, one pattern stands out, which is that most of them resist a single clean explanation of who created the backrooms and why. Official Wiki policies explicitly embrace multiple canons, while high-profile interpretations like Kane Parsons' series frame async as discoverers of a pre-existing anomaly rather than architects, preserving the sense that the Backrooms are bigger and older than any human project. Some canons like Origins and certain Pantheon variants do offer a literal god or pantheon as creators, but even these tend to frame their stories as what-if scenarios rather than ironclad universal lore. Fan theories that treat the Backrooms as a manifestation of the collective unconscious or as a simulation bug reinforce the idea that the origin is itself part of the horror. Every attempt to explain it reveals more about human fears than about the space. I started by saying this, and I will end on this note as well. The Backrooms are best enjoyed with an air of mystery around them, and I think that the recently released movie does a fine job in portraying the same. It gives you some context so that you are not grasping at nothing, but it still leaves a lot to your interpretation. I would love to hear your take on the matter in the comments below, and also let me know if you enjoyed the movie. If you appreciate the efforts to bring you this content, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more such videos.